We're speaking tonight about Haman, the main antagonist in the story of Megillas Esther, the story of Esther, which is the basis for the holiday of Purim. So one of the interesting ironies that comes out in the story of Purim is Haman, one of the greatest anti-Semites who ever lived, was planning to hang Mordecai, right? That was his great plan. He was going to hang Mordecai, and that's how he was going to conquer his enemy. Yet Haman himself was the one who ended up being hanged on the gallows that he set up for Mordecai. So one of the great ironies in all of Tanakh, you prepared your own vehicle for being killed, right? So this is explicit in the verses. It was actually Haman's wife. Her name was Zeresh. It says, Vatomer lo Zeresh ishto. His wife Zeresh said to him, they said, Yasu eitz, make a tree, an eitz, a big, tall pole of wood. Gavoa chamishim, it should be 50 amos high, 50 cubits tall. Uva boiker and Merlamelech, go tell the king, the Yitlu es Mordechai Olav, you're going to go and you're going to hang Mordechai on this tree. So it says at that point, Sameach beyitiv hadavar lefnei Haman v'yasa eitz. And it says that Haman was happy, and it was very good in front of him, and he made this eitz. He made this tree, this pole, wooden pole, to hang Mordecai. Now, not even so long later, towards the end of Megillah, in chapter 8, so it says, Hine ha'etz, behold, the eitz asher asa Haman leMordechai, the eitz that you made, that Haman made for Mordechai, asher diber tov ve'amelech, omed bebeis Haman, that same pole is standing in Haman's house. It's gavoa chamishim am, it's 50 amos tall, the same one. V'yomer hamelech tuluhu olav, go and hang Haman on the eitz. So this is the story how the weapon Haman chose to use to make this 50 cubit tall gallows ended up being used on him. And it's the great lesson that we see that the acts of the wicked come back onto them. And this is the great level of divine providence that we see in Megillas Esther. Now, maybe one might think, it's a little bit coincidental. It's a nice sort of poetic justice, and sort of leave it at that. But I think there's a lot more to it. So we'll start as an interesting statement of the sages in Tractate Chulin. In Tractate Chulin, at this point in the Talmud is trying to find where different personalities in Tanakh, in the Jewish Bible, are mentioned originally in the Chumash, in the 5 books of Moses. So some of the great personalities from the Bible, they're not necessarily mentioned explicitly in Chumash. In fact, they weren't even alive to be in the story of Chumash. Nevertheless, they're mentioned, maybe hinted at, in the Bible. So interestingly enough, the Talmud asks, where is there an allusion to Haman in the Torah? Right? Haman wasn't in the Torah. He lived many years, maybe 500-600 years after the conclusion of the Chumash. Yet the Chazal ask, the sages ask, where is there a hint to Haman in the Torah? So it says in the verse, again, this is in the context of when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of good and evil. And they say, Hashem is looking for them. Hashem says, Ayeka, where are you? And they say, we heard your voice in the Gan. We heard your voice in the garden. Va'ira, we were afraid. Ki erom anoichi. Because we were naked, we weren't clothed. Ve'echave, and I hid. I was afraid we weren't clothed, and I hid. And then Hashem, God, says back to Adam, to Adam. He says, who told you that you weren't clothed? Who said that to you? Who said that you weren't clothed? Who told you that? Hamin ha'etz asher tzivisicha levilti achol mimenu achalta? Did you eat from the eitz, from the tree that I didn't tell you to eat from? Now, if you'll notice the verse that I just read, it says, Hamin ha'etz. Did you eat from the eitz? The Hebrew is Hamin. Hamin from ha'etz, from the eitz. Now, the Torah is not vowelized. We have a tradition how it's supposed to be vowelized, but really, the Torah in its essence is not vowelized. So even though it's vowelized Hamin, but without vowels, you could read it as Haman ha'etz. Haman ha'etz. So this is the famous statement of the sages that Haman is actually hinted at in the Torah in the context of the Eitz Hadas, in the context of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So if anyone was at Kesser by Shalashudis, our very own Max Spector said a beautiful drasha on this idea. I'm going to take it a little bit of a different direction, but you'll remember this was referenced at Max Spector's drasha the other day, which was very beautiful. So again, so this is where Haman is originally alluded to in the Torah. Hamin ha'etz. Did you eat from the eitz? Did you eat from that tree of knowledge of good and evil? From the eitz hadas tov v'ra. This is the original source of Haman. So we have to think, what is this connection between Haman and the eitz? What's this connection? What does he have to do with it? He only lived hundreds of years later. He was nowhere near the story of Adam and Chava. He had nothing to do with it. So why is he specifically hinted at over here? Moreover, if we want to be sensitive to the Megillah itself, we'll ask ourselves, why was this particular form of death chosen for Haman? It's not by chance that it's this one. He could have been beheaded. He could have been strangled. All different types of potential executions that could have been chosen for Haman. Why this particular one of hanging on the gallows, on an eitz, on a tree? So, in order to answer these issues, to understand what the deeper connection is between Haman and the tree, we have to go back to the story of Adam and Chava, to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden. So it could be we've spoken about this concept before, but let's just take a quick look. What was life like for Adam in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden? And ultimately, what caused him to eat from the Eitz Hadas? What was the underlying cause? So, we've mentioned before that when Adam was in the Garden of Eden, he was at an incredibly high spiritual level. Chazal say, the sages say, that he was able to see from one end of the world to the other. This is not to be necessarily understood physically, but in a spiritual sense, he saw from one end of the world to the other. He knew, he understood the deepest secrets of the Torah, Tamei HaMitzvahs, the reasons behind the mitzvahs even. All of these things, Adam Harishon, Adam was able to understand. It was on a very, very high spiritual level. And even physically, his life was very good. He had a wife handmade for him by God. He had a garden filled with all of the greatest flavors and tastes to suit his palate, whatever he could possibly want. He had malachim, the angels, serving him the finest delicacies and wine, anything he could possibly desire. Now, one of the important things to realize, and this is really one of the main differences, one of the things that happened between when before and after the sin of Adam eating from the tree, is that it used to be the Yetzer Hara was external to a person. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, that force within a person that causes him to desire and to be self-centered, that force in a person used to not be inside the person. It used to be an external force, and that was represented by the snake, the Nachash. He was outside of Adam, he was not inside. When Adam Arishon ate from the tree of knowledge and good and evil, he took in that Yitzhar, he took it from an external force, an external thing, and he brought it inside him. He consumed it. It became a part of him. Right? We say, you are what you eat. That's the colloquial term we say. You are what you eat. So what you eat has an effect on you. In this context, the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, the effect on Adam, and subsequently, and obviously Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, and subsequently their children, all the way into the future, was that it internalized a certain, the Yetzer Hara in general. That's what it did. It internalized for them the Yetzer Hara. It internalized for them the evil inclination. So the question is, what was that message? What was the message that caused Adam to end up eating from the Eitz Hadas? And what was that message that became then internalized into him? So, like I mentioned before, Adam Rishon had everything. There was nothing he didn't have. He had all the food money could buy, the greatest luxuries. He had angels, malachim serving him. He had a wife handmade for him by God. He had everything. There was one thing he didn't have. There was only one thing he didn't have. He didn't have the Eitz Hadas. He didn't have the fruit from the Eitz Hadas. That was the only thing that was off limits to him. There's nothing else. He had everything else he could have wanted. There was one thing off limits to him. The message of the Nachash to Chava and also to Adam was, you may have everything, you may have all the things, but you don't have that. There's something you're lacking. And he made them focus on that lack. Look, you're really lacking this. Until they ended up succumbing to that pressure. Again, at that point, it was an external pressure, almost like a peer pressure. Succumbing to that feeling, to that sense of, we have everything, but not that. This concept of, I have everything except that, is perhaps the underlying force that brought Adam and Chava to this sin of eating from the Eitz Hadas. Now, it's important, the connection I'm about to make, because I think it's really showing the fundamental principle of the Yetzer Hara, a connection to Haman himself. Because if you'll note, Haman also had it all. He was as rich as could be imagined. He had, Chazal say, over 200 sons. He had power. He had prestige. He was one of the highest ranking government officials. He was the prime minister, the second in command to the king. He had everything a person could want. There was one thing that made Haman upset. One thing that he was lacking. One thing he didn't have, and that was that he didn't have Mordechai wouldn't bow down to him. He would pass by Mordechai, and Mordechai was unwilling to bow down to him. In fact, it says in the Megillah, he goes, I have everything, Haman says, V'kol zeh, all of this, everything that I have, all my riches, all my prestige, einenu shoveli. None of it is worthwhile to me. None of it is valuable to me. B'kol eis asher ani roa es Mordechai ha-Yehudi yoshev b'shar melech. Because of every time I see Mordechai. Every time I see Mordechai sitting at the gate of the king, that makes it that everything that I have becomes worthless in my mind. Everything that I have is worthless, he says. So this attitude that everything is worthless, and as much as I have this issue, this lack, that's what made it that Adam HaRishon and Chava succumbed to the temptation of the Eitz Hadas. They had everything, but they lacked this one thing. Everyone could think in their own life. Everyone has issues. Everyone has things going on, sorrows, difficulties. Some people have financial difficulties. Many people have financial difficulties. Some people have medical problems, God forbid. People have social problems, issues going on between neighbors or at work, between friends. Legal issues, God forbid. Everyone has something that for them makes it, I can't really enjoy what I have. Because of this issue, because of this sorrow that I'm going through, because of this financial issue that I have, that makes that I can't really enjoy what I have. I can't really enjoy the good fortune that I do have, the things that are enjoyable in my life, the blessings that I do have. Why? Because there's something in my life that takes away that joy. It makes me distracted from the joy that I have because I have a terrible issue going on in my life. That issue, the one issue that a person may have could be, and some people have more than one even, it could be so distracting, so all-consuming, that even though the blessings, which are always greater, he has blessings, that the blessings become overshadowed. And this was Haman's cry, Ein hakol shavali. Kol zeh eino shavali. Nothing is worthwhile to me. Nothing is worth anything to me. Because of this one little Jew who won't stand up for me. If we look at Haman, it seems silly. He had all the riches, all the prestige a person could ever want. And yet he's succumbing to something so small. So there's this force in a person that makes us unable to appreciate the goodness that we have in our life due to a side problem, due to a problem that we have. And sometimes the problems are significant. I'm not denying that. But at the end of the day, it overshadows the goodness that we have. And that perspective, that philosophy on life is what led Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, to this sin of eating from the Eitz Hadas. So, as I said before, after eating from this Eitz Hadas, after eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Chava internalized this message. This message became a part of them. And we, their descendants, have this also ingrained into us. The kol zeh eino shavali. Nothing's worthwhile to me as long as this issue keeps popping up, as long as I keep having that problem. So we've internalized that attitude. It no longer is an external, force, it's now an internal force inside of us. Now, the whole Jewish history, the whole of human history really, is we all are on a mission. What's our mission? Since Adam HaRishon left, since Adam HaRishon sinned and ate from the Eitz Hadas, he was expelled from the garden. Our whole mission as human beings is to get ourselves back to that state of Adam HaRishon prior to the sin of the Eitz Hadas. Now, there was one time period where we actually had that. There was one time period where the Jewish people actually achieved the level of Adam prior to the sin. And when they reached that level, they were totally free of that internal Yetzer Hara. It became re-externalized almost. And that was during the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. The great power of the Torah at Mount Sinai made it that, again, the Jewish people became like Adam HaRishon before the sin. They lost what's called in the language of the sages, the zuama of the nachash. They lost that poison that the nachash, the snake, had injected into our ancestors. With the receiving of the Torah, they lost that. However, because of the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, they went down again. So that was our situation prior to the Purim story. During the Purim story, Chazal referred to the Purim story as actually a second receiving of the Torah, a second Kabbalah HaTorah. We re-received the Torah. If the first reception of the Torah was the oral Torah, of course, also the written Torah, the first receiving was the written Torah. The second receiving was actually the oral Torah. Not that they didn't also receive the oral Torah originally, but the second reception of the Torah, which happened during Purim, Kimu v'kiblu ha-Yehudim, the Jews stood up and they re-accepted Kimu v'kiblu ha-Yehudim. That's why people have a minhag on Purim to have a special time set aside for learning Torah. They were re-makabel the Torah. They re-accepted the Torah. So, as another Kabbalah HaTorah, since this was considered a re-acceptance of the Torah, we also had, I'm suggesting, another example of us losing a little bit of that internalized evil inclination. We were able to externalize that Yetzer Hara a little bit. And it could be each Purim, we undergo that cycle again, where we have an internalized Yetzer Hara, and on Purim we have the opportunity to externalize it, to realize that voice inside my head, that evil inclination that's inside of me, that tells me all the different negative things it could whisper to me. It could be that, this isn't going well for you, and life isn't so great right now. You should really feel maybe depressed. You should feel this. You should feel stressed. Or it tells you, you really should enjoy that second piece of cake. All the different things that our evil inclination can tell us and get us involved in. All of those things, the first step in overcoming that inclination is to realize it's not really me. It may feel like me, it feels like it's me thinking, but really it's external to me. Because it's really that zuama, that poison the snake injected into my ancestors all those years ago. And I have that as a lingering effect. During Purim, since there was an aspect of Kabbalah HaTorah, there was, again, we said the pattern is during Kabbalah HaTorah, you're able to get out that zuama, get out that evil inclination, which the way I'm explaining it is that you're externalizing it. It's becoming external to you again. This isn't black and white, meaning could be it's a little bit internal, it's not, you could sort of externalize it a little bit. It's not black and white, it's not all or nothing. It's an avoda, it's a work in progress. It's something that a person needs to train to be able to see his evil inclination as being external to him. But that process is something that occurs on Purim. So what does this have to do with Haman? What does this have to do with Eitz Hadas? So I mentioned before that when Adam HaRishon ate from the Eitz Hadas, that was with the advice of the Nachash HaKadmoni, the primordial serpent. Now, interestingly enough, Chazal and the Sifrei Hasidus, the Hasidic texts, they often compare the Nachash to Amalek, the precursor of Haman. Haman HaAgagi was a descendant of Agag, who was the king of Amalek. Amalek was the sworn enemy of the Jewish people, and Chazal, and in particular the Kabbalistic Svarim and the Hasidic Svarim, draw a parallel between Amalek and the Nachash HaKadmoni. This force, this evil inclination, is represented by Amalek, and in turn, Haman. Haman Amaleki, Haman the Amalekite, is the external representation of the Yetzer Hara. Chazal, and I think I saw it from the Bnei Yissaschar I was looking at today, they make this connection. Amalek is the representative of the Yetzer Hara in the world. So our avoda on Purim is to take that Yetzer Hara to the side, almost the internal Amalek that we have inside of us, the internal Haman that we have inside of us that tells us, "Ein v'kol zeh eino shava li," nothing's worth it to me, I have nothing to be appreciative for, everything's going wrong. That voice inside of us, and to realize that's not really me. So Haman was hanged on this eitz, on the gallows that we said was 50 amos tall. I saw an amazing Das Zakenim, one of the commentaries in the Mikros Gedolos, in the Chumash. It's going on this same verse that I mentioned earlier, where it says, Hashem says to Adam and Chava, Mi higid l'cha ki eiram ata. Who said that you were not clothed? Hamin ha'eta shetzivisicha levilti achol mimenu achalta. Hamin ha'etz. Did you eat from that eitz hadas? Did you eat from that eitz? Did you eat from that tree? The Das Zakenim says an amazing thing. He says, Hamin ha'etz. It's brought in a medrash that Hashem says, Al ve'ata yignoiz. Now we're going to save this eitz. We're going to be gainez it. We're going to save this eitz. Vayishamer laHaman. And we're going to save it for Haman. Sheyitle olav. That Haman should be hanged on this eitz. The same eitz hadas tov v'ra that Adam ate from, and thereby brought the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, into his system for all the generations up until now. I'm going to take that same tree and I'm going to use it to hang none other than Haman. Thousands of years in the future, it's going to be the same eitz that the sin of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra was committed with. We're going to use that eitz to hang Haman. So Haman was hanged on the same tree. We could explain this perhaps. I'm a little bit frightened to say this, but it was a thought that I had. We said before that what's the process that's happening by Kabbalah Torah? We're externalizing once again our Yetzer Hara. We're going back to that state that we were in prior to the original sin. That process is an externalization of the Yetzer Hara. It's the symbolism. Again, I'm not sure. I'm afraid to say this. I need to speak to someone who knows these things. But the symbolism is striking. At the end of the Purim story, the Jewish people re-accepted the Torah. They were on a level of Kimu v'kiblu ha-Yehudim. They were back to being one united nation once again on a very, very high level. The symbolism of re-putting Haman, the representative of the Yetzer Hara, back onto the tree by which he came. Where back onto that tree that Adam had eaten from and internalized the Yetzer Hara, it's almost we're putting him back onto that tree. So If that's the symbolism, I'm not sure. It seems to me like this. I need to speak it out to someone, but it seems to me very striking. The symbolism. Haman, who represents the Yetzer Hara, we internalized that Yetzer Hara, that evil inclination, when Adam ate from the Eitz Hadas. Throughout the Purim story, we re-externalized. We took that Yetzer Hara a little bit outside of ourselves once again. We realized that voice isn't necessarily mine, and that's represented putting Haman onto the tree, back onto the tree where it came from. So this is the work that we have to do over Purim. We all have a Yetzer Hara, we have an evil inclination inside of us, and sometimes it's hard to recognize that as an independent voice, as something external to me. It feels like it's me. I want the second chocolate cake. I want to get really angry and annoyed at my kids. I want to say something mean to the driver who just cut me off. That's me. It feels like me. But the avoda, the work that a Jew has to do on Purim, and this is aided in part by the wine that we drink on Purim, is to externalize that voice, is to realize that's not really me. And through doing that, that's how we reach at least a little bit. I'm not saying we can complete this avoda. It's something that takes a full lifetime and a full Jewish history to be able to complete. We re-externalize the Yetzer Hara. It comes to be not something that's inside of us anymore. We can see it as something separate from us, the way it was originally supposed to be. And we can reattain a little bit of that level of Adam Harishon, of Adam, prior to the sin of the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. Okay, so that is what I wanted to present to everyone tonight. It's something that I would like to speak to someone who knows a little more than me about these topics, because I think it's a really amazing idea if it's true. But I appreciate everyone for tuning in. I hope everyone has an amazing, happy Purim. It's an incredibly powerful day. Rabbi Glazer is going to be giving a shiur, I think, on Wednesday night, also about the power of Purim. So everyone should tune into that, because it's an amazing day. It's Yom Kippur is like Purim. Purim is like the main thing, and Yom Kippur is just like Purim. Yom Kippurim, it's like Purim. So we can accomplish perhaps even more than we can accomplish on Yom Kippur, if we can imagine such a thing. So I wish everyone a very happy Purim.